This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Give me at least 30 minutes for news, and then we can all go back to streaming trash TV. Sound good? Lawmakers are going to play a big role in building support for coronavirus vaccines, but from where are those lawmakers getting their expert advice? Some public health officials are worried. Plus, millions of Americans are at risk of losing federal benefits if Congress doesn't act soon. We look at the negotiations as the clock ticks down. But first, here's what you need to know right now.
For nearly a decade, Facebook has used its dominance and monopoly power to crush smaller rivals and snuff out competition, all at the expense of everyday users.
At least 46 attorneys general announced an antitrust lawsuit against Facebook today. The suit specifically mentions the tech giant's purchase of Instagram and WhatsApp. It alleges that Facebook engaged in unlawful and anti-competitive tactics to try and keep its monopoly by buying up other rivals. Lawmakers have put intense scrutiny on Silicon Valley as they look for more ways to hold big tech accountable. In late October, the Justice Department and 11 states' attorneys general filed a different antitrust case against Google. Lawmakers across the pond are also cracking down. The United Kingdom's government announced it plans to create a digital markets unit to better monitor and enforce rules on online platforms like Google and Facebook. Canada has given its approval to Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine, with doses available to the public as early as next week. In the US, the FDA is in the process of reviewing the vaccines for emergency use authorization. That's expected to get approved later this week. According to the federal government's Operation Warp Speed, only half of the available vaccines will be shipped each week. The other half will be held in storage. That's to ensure there will always be enough vaccines to complete the second dose required for the vaccine to take effect. In the UK, health officials are sending out a warning for Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine. If someone has a significant history of allergic reactions, they should not be given the shot. It comes after 2 healthcare workers responded adversely. It's important to point out thousands of people have since received the vaccine with no issues. The United Arab Emirates approved another vaccine candidate today, this one coming from China. According to the preliminary data, it is 86% effective, but little other information on the trials were released, like the ages of volunteers or how many of the cases were analyzed. One team's COVID outbreak is another team's playoff problem. Let me explain. The Ohio-Michigan game, originally set for Saturday, has been canceled. That's because the Michigan squad is dealing with a coronavirus outbreak and wouldn't have enough players available to play. This is a huge deal for the Buckeyes, who are currently ranked 4th in the Big Ten. According to the rules, Ohio State needs to play this weekend to have enough games to qualify for the conference title. As it stands, a team must play 6 games to qualify for the championship game. Big Ten athletic directors have not made any announcements to change that requirement. Public health experts are invested in who is advising U.S. senators about the coronavirus, and rightfully so. Lawmakers are likely to play a key role in building support for COVID vaccines. But the appearance of one vaccine skeptic who testified at a coronavirus hearing has raised concerns within the medical community. Newsy's Patrick Terpstra explains.
Jane Orient was among doctors invited to speak virtually this week at a U.S. Senate coronavirus hearing. She has long supported hydroxychloroquine for treating COVID. That's even after the FDA revoked approval for the drug. Orient disputed concerns about possible side effects like damage to the heart.
Hydroxychloroquine may actually protect the heart.
She also urged caution about COVID vaccines.
Vaccines are touted as the great hope, but we don't have them yet, and they have not yet been shown to prevent contagion.
Orient has long led the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. IRS records we reviewed show it's a big name for a relatively small group of 3,000 members and a budget under $1 million. They're on record opposing mandated vaccines, calling them a serious intrusion into individual liberty. Orient has linked vaccines to autism, an idea dismissed by decades of research. She told us she'd still like to see more data to rule out a connection.
I think we just really don't know.
Even as the CDC says in 18-point font, there is no link between vaccines and autism. Ahead of the hearing, dozens of doctors and scientists released a statement warning senators against giving a voice to people like Orient.
It's a complete misuse of the platform that they've been given.
Dr. Paul Offit directs the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He says inviting Orient to speak on Capitol Hill is potentially dangerous.
It's like having a meeting to discuss, the solar system and having somebody who represents the point of view that the sun revolves around the earth. It just doesn't add anything. All it does is just take up time and confuse people.
Republican Senator Mitt Romney also blasted the hearing.
I think it's nuts to bring that into the Senate.
Orient was invited to testify by Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin and booster of hydroxychloroquine.
Why not give it a shot?
It was the second panel he held featuring doctors with views disputed by science.
Why is there such a concerted effort to silence the voices of courageous health professionals promoting early treatment? It makes no sense.
After the hearing, Orient told us she's trying to save lives instead of denying treatment.
There is a lot of hostility toward this idea of early treatment. There's also a lot of hostility toward anybody who raises any concerns about vaccines.
She brushed off critics who say her views do more harm than good. Patrick Terpstra, Newsy, Washington.
When you're back, we're taking a look at your search history. Oh, it's too late. You should have erased that ages ago. Curiosity is the lust of the mind. It's the mother of invention and the essence of our existence. Those are all things I just learned from a Google search autocomplete as a way to get warmed up for this next bit. Americans were curious about the meanings of a lot of terms. So here's what y'all Googled. Since you certified freaks have been Googling, I don't think I need to break down this acronym. In any other year, WAP would have been a club banger, but instead it had to settle for the quarantine late summer anthem. The Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion collaboration provided some good, raunchy fun in a year full of disappointments and spurred a dance challenge on social media platforms, especially TikTok. But the song also prompted some pretty interesting conversations about sex positivity and censorship. New York Times writer John K. Ermanica puts it like this: men rap and sing about sex in preposterous and sometimes awkward detail all the time. It's beyond time that the same courtesy is extended to women like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. And we get that this song might not be everybody's cup of tea. I wouldn't dare rap this to my parents. But the censored version was a play too. You won't get the meaning of the acronym over the radio, but the clean version allowed the song to be heard in even more places, which meant more revenue. There's no research to back this up, but I think WAP also helped people appreciate leg stretches a bit more. I mean, look at this kick. Easily a hamstring tear for me. We can't forget that this year has also been a continuous season of demonstrations for racial justice, which makes BIPOC a pretty timely term. The acronym stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. According to Google Trends, searches for BIPOC started blowing up after the killing of George Floyd on May 25th. The term itself, though, might date back all the way to 2013. But the term also caused a bit of confusion when it really started making the rounds.
I didn't know that this was a new way to group, identify, categorize people. Like, I had no idea. For me, it kind of came out of nowhere.
While BIPOC is an attempt to build solidarity and highlight the voices of minorities, the catch-all isn't always helpful, even if it's well-intentioned. Part of the problem is that when it's overused, it just kind of flattens the nuance. Much like the term POC or people of color, when overused, it blurs the differences between affected communities instead of focusing on specific issues within, let's say, Black communities or Indigenous communities, etc. Specificity is important. There isn't really a right or wrong here. Language is tricky and there isn't a one-size-fits-all. But the hope is that the focus on people who are a part of BIPOC will also spur discussions about solutions to issues faced by those individual communities. We can't overlook what sort of outsized effect the pandemic has had on our lives this year, and thanks to Google, We all became pre-med students while internalizing words like asymptomatic. That term became pretty damn important in understanding the spread of COVID-19. For the record, an asymptomatic person is one who doesn't show symptoms. Asymptomatic spread has been a pretty frightening element of this pandemic. One study showed that 40% of children ages 6 to 13 who tested positive for COVID-19 were asymptomatic, but at the same capacity to spread the virus as people who showed symptoms. According to the CDC, most US cases of the coronavirus are spread by people who have no symptoms. Understanding this underlines just how important it is to do the small things. Wear a mask, avoid large gatherings, and maybe make a list of people you want to hug once we all get inoculated. The tail end of this year has been chock full of deadlines. When to register to vote, when to certify presidential election results, etc. Here's one more. When to act before millions of Americans lose federal benefits. Congress has until the end of the year before the CARES Act dries up, and new relief will be necessary to keep people afloat. Newsy's Bianca Fascini explains.
Over 13 million. That's how many Americans will lose benefits at the end of the year if Congress doesn't act. That's especially true for gig workers, millions of whom will be kicked off unemployment all at once.
There's going to be a huge flood of supply in combination with a huge retraction of demand all at the same time.
Joss was a rideshare driver in Los Angeles until March. She went on unemployment due to a medical condition that makes her at risk for COVID, and she never went back to that job.
I'm still not really at a point where I want to do other jobs, or at least jobs where you have to go in person and interact with the public.
8.8 million are on pandemic unemployment assistance, which expanded benefits to freelance workers. Another 4.5 million are claiming pandemic emergency unemployment compensation after state benefits ran out. Both of those programs and other benefits will expire at the end of this month unless Congress does something. The deadline looms as new COVID-19 cases rise, posing a risk to the economy's recovery.
We're talking about a human tragedy here, something that would put a smear on the face of the United States.
There are currently 3 relief bills on the table. The latest one, a $908 billion package, seems the most likely to pass and would extend unemployment. But time is ticking. There is good news for Joss. Nearly 9 months later, she's starting a new job remotely, something she's not taking for granted.
I'm actually legitimately excited about it.
Bianca Fascini, Newsy, Washington.
This is my office here.
Halftime. Sure, you can check your phone, but I'm going to need your undivided attention when you're back. Sorry if that makes me sound needy.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
We've talked a bit about how the pandemic really laid bare certain inequities in this country. For example, people of color, especially immigrant women, were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic recession. Many domestic workers lost their jobs and were discouraged from seeking federal assistance because of their status in this country. Newsy's Ben Shamisa spoke to one woman who is a domestic worker about her hardships during the pandemic.
Mexican immigrant Magdalena Portillo has been cleaning houses in Chicago for decades, and she's proud of her skills. Thanks to her domestic work, she raised 2 kids alone and has helped support 7 grandchildren. But then the pandemic hit.
Mis clientes me empezaron a llamar que no querían que yo fuera.
In a matter of days in late February, Portillo lost all her clients. She's part of a group that's been hit particularly hard by the coronavirus recession. Immigrant women have faced much higher unemployment during the pandemic than immigrant men, US-born women, and US-born men. A new Migration Policy Institute analysis shows.
Immigrant women are concentrated in some occupations that have been hit hardest by this recession. Those include maids and housekeepers and waitresses.
Foreign-born women have also stopped working or job hunting at a higher rate than other groups. in part because of their often dual roles as workers and parents.
Y aunque yo tuviera ahorita trabajo, tampoco podría trabajar porque mis hijos dependen de mí.
Before the pandemic, Erendira Zamaco worked over 40 hours a week as a house cleaner and nanny in Philadelphia. Now she's only on the job a few hours per month because her 3 kids are doing remote schooling and need her supervision, and because employers have cut back.
Cuando uno está viviendo esto, es difícil.
Over 90% of Spanish-speaking domestic workers lost jobs due to COVID-19, a recent trade survey found. Yet the vast majority didn't apply for unemployment insurance, and less than a third received a federal stimulus check. That's partly because many are undocumented.
Siempre somos las más vulnerables que nos dejan fuera de cualquier ayuda.
Still, Zamaco and Portillo say they are scraping by thanks to help from food pantries, labor rights groups, friends and family. After years of serving others, usually at low wages, they simply want the incoming Biden administration and other politicians to acknowledge their plight.
Que nos tomen en cuenta en absolutamente y que no nos dejen olvidadas.
Ben Chamizo, Newsy.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. And yes, these mugs are lit, but no, they aren't for sale. Not yet, at least. President-elect Biden is steadily filling out his roster of folks to head up departments and agencies under his administration, but he's already hit a snag within his own party for his pick for CIA director. Some Democrats have raised concerns about a senior CIA official because of his stance on 9/11 torture tactics. Newsy's Sasha Ingber explains.
A top contender to lead the CIA under President-elect Joe Biden is facing fierce pushback from Democrats for his stance on post-9/11 interrogation tactics.
I have never heard him advocate for torture, and I say that in very good conscience.
That's veteran intelligence officer Mark Polymeropoulos defending former CIA deputy and acting director Michael Morell, after some senators signaled they wouldn't confirm him, calling Morell a torture apologist.
I don't like calling it torture, right, for one simple reason. Because to call it torture says my guys were torturers, right? And they were told that they weren't. They were told that what they were doing was legal, and I'm going to defend my guys to my last breath.
Morell's spokesperson tells Newsy today he believes many mistakes were made. Polymeropoulos says Morell is an outstanding pick because of his 3 decades of national security experience and his personal relationship with President-elect Biden.
We would end up sacrificing really considerable national security experience for those that perhaps on the left would want to be totally clean. I don't think that's good for the country, and I don't think that's smart, as we really need to take the intelligence community kind of into the next century.
The agency came under fire for using techniques like waterboarding following the September 11th attacks. The former lead investigator for the Senate Intelligence Committee torture report says though Morell wasn't involved in the program, he rejected oversight and should have penalized certain officers.
You know, the next CIA director needs to be able to acknowledge wrongdoing and hold their CIA officers accountable for wrongdoing. There's a greater charge to hold people accountable in secret organizations, and I hope the next director is able to do that.
Daniel Jones says there are plenty of other qualified candidates to lead the agency.
To say that we need to recycle people who were engaged in a program that was many believe to be illegal and was certainly immoral and more importantly ineffective, that we have to go back to those people, I think is just a ridiculous thought.
Newsy contacted all the Democrats on the Senate's Intelligence Committee to gauge support for Morell. Our only response from a source close to Senator Mark Warner saying he doesn't object to Morell. Biden is also believed to be considering a diverse slate of other candidates, including former CIA Counterterrorism Deputy Director Darrell Blocker, former CIA Deputy Director David Cohen, former Defense Intelligence Agency Director Lieutenant General Vince Stewart, and Sue Gordon, who held top positions at the CIA and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Other individuals, let me just throw out there, that are being considered for the next post of CIA director were certainly involved later on in the Obama years in terms of, counter-terrorist operations and actions that also have been controversial. Are we going to make that a litmus test as well for the next CIA director?
From Washington, Sasha Ingber, Newsy.
Remember earlier in the pandemic when all y'all flooded grocery stores to snag the essentials? Yeah, well, grocery stores across the country are still busier than ever. Demand for groceries is up over last year. And while product manufacturers have adjusted to meet the demands, jobs in places that help get food to your table are going unfilled. National reporter Chris Conti tells us why.
Feeding the country during a pandemic is no short order. In fact, it's an incredibly tall one, stacked 60 feet high in warehouses across the country.
Our biggest challenge is keeping everybody safe.
That is Mike Violet. He's the CEO at Associated Grocers of New England.
Thank you very much for all that you've done.
We first met Mike back in March when Americans were buying food in record numbers.
Grabbing yams right now, it's just one pace,
Workers in this warehouse could barely keep up. Shelves sat empty as suppliers couldn't keep up with demand for everything from paper towels to flour.
What we saw last March, you won't see that now. The paper manufacturers have changed their lines and how they're producing and what they're producing.
Demand for groceries across the country is still up nearly 20% over this time last year. There are random shortages for things like glass mason jars.
People are cooking. People are eating at home and they're cooking. A lot of people learned to cook from last March forward and they enjoy cooking more and they're doing more of it.
This time around, though, Mike and other grocers are urging Americans to avoid panic buying as some states reimpose COVID restrictions.
There's really no need to just stock up. There'll be plenty of product. The food supply is very, very strong. And by people just stocking up, it just makes it harder for others to get products and makes people have more frequent stops to have to go to the store.
There's something else they've noticed here. Even with near record numbers of Americans looking for work, they're having trouble filling jobs. Warehouses and factories across the country have noticed similar trends. Part of the reason, workers are concerned about catching COVID and not filling open positions. Starting pay for a job here, though, is around $15 an hour. It comes with healthcare benefits and paid time off. But this is not the kind of job that can be done from home. And there's this.
I think a lot of it is the type of work that it is. It involves some heavy lifting to work in the warehouse and selecting cases, so it can be hard work.
But all that aside, these men and women will keep working to keep grocery stores' shelves stocked, to keep America fed during the pandemic. In Pembroke, New Hampshire, I'm Chris Conti.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more in the loop tomorrow, same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way, whether you like it or not.